So we have about 90 minutes to talk about compliance. And, they suggested that I begin by giving an overview of the importance of compliance, but I kind of think for anybody that works in the industry, that's a little already known. The answer to that's already known. By the way, I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Henry Wyckowski. They spelled my name wrong, but it's close enough.
Two different ways.
You'll figure out they put an extra C in there. It's Wyckowski. I'm the counsel to the California Cannabis Industry Association. I've been a lawyer representing the industry for, I think, about 15, maybe 16 years now. So I've watched the industry and grow from its early stages to where it is now with legalization. And of course, with legalization came compliance. And I used to read the Pied Piper to my kids when they were little, and I always remember the line that, be careful what you wish for, because we wished for legalization, and look what we got. We got compliance. Now, one of the ways that I encourage the industry in California to address that issue is that when early on, when Colorado was the first state that went with adult use, or Colorado and Washington, but Colorado is the state that really took it and ran. The work that we were doing there, people started to talk about, I'm not in the cannabis business anymore, I'm in the compliance business. Because compliance is dominating, for those of you that are active, it dominates your day-to-day life because everything is regulated. I see a lot of people nodding, so you can relate to what I'm saying. And, it's difficult to figure out because, you first of all have the state regs, but then you have counties that have their own special regs, and then you have cities that also have their own special regs. So you have to, if you're operating, let's say, in a city that has a county reg and a state reg and a city reg, somebody's got to be on top of that all the time. And I think that as people in the, as entities grow, what we're going to see is the need for specific full-time compliance officers to pay attention to that. One of the things that we did to address that on behalf of our clients is we brought in a new attorney that does nothing but compliance, and they're busy like 150% of the time. But for those of you that came here to get information, you're fortunate because we really do have a all-star cast here of people from the industry, and they're all familiar with compliance. And so we should be able to answer most, if not all, of your questions. Some questions don't really have answers, but we'll try to do the best we can. So why don't we start off over here on the right, and why don't you introduce yourself, Brooke, and give us a little bit of your background for the people that don't know who you are.
Hello. Ooh, all right. I am Brooke Butler. I'm Vice President of Simplifya. We are a technology platform that was founded by the Vicente Cederberg law firm out of Colorado back in 2016. And basically, we're trying to help all of you guys navigate the very murky waters of your state and local regulations. We try to distill the regs into a 12th grade reading level. Sometimes that's quite difficult. And then give you kind of, cheat sheets and guides to really stay on top of the ever-changing regulatory framework landscape that you now operate in on a daily basis, as Henry kind of pointed out.
Tyler?
Hey everybody, my name is Tyler Autera, and I am the COO and co-founder of Cannalysis Labs. We are a testing lab located in Southern California in Santa Ana. And we've been around for about 3 years now, and we really strive from a compliance perspective to help our customers be more successful in sort of adapting to regulations as it relates to testing specifically, and being transparent, open, and guiding people the right direction.
Jessica?
Hi, everybody. My name is Jessica Velazquez. I am founder and managing partner of Indiva Advisors. We are a CPA firm that specifically caters to the cannabis industry. We've been doing this for about 4 years now. We have clients in about 10 states. So we have a pretty good view of issues coming up on the accounting, tax issues, advisory issues, both from a federal and a state level.
Okay. And
Hello.
Julie.
My name is Juli Crockett. I was recruited into the cannabis industry in early 2015 to launch a vaporizer company, which I very quickly in my first meeting with our compliance attorney learned was an illegal company. So I became their chief
Really?
compliance officer.
No.
Oh no, it was truly illegal.
What year? What year was this?
Early 2015.
Be careful, the statute might not have run.
I didn't own it. So I became their chief compliance officer, and after 3 years was recruited by our compliance attorney to work at MMLG, which is a compliance consultancy based out of Los Angeles. And I'm their director of compliance and help companies with ongoing operational compliance. I'm also a board member of CCIA and have been for the last 3 years and chair the legislative committee.
Thanks, Julie.
James?
Hi, I am a cannabis land use local government attorney, which is what I have done for the last 15 years. Prior to that, I was an Oakland zoning prosecutor. I now run a small firm out of Oakland, although we're happy to help you wherever you are in California with compliance, licensing, state and local, and all of these fabulous financial deals that are being invented in new entities, purchases, mergers. Yeah, we'll talk about that more later.
Okay, and last but certainly not least is Kimberly.
Hi, my name is Kimberly Sims, also an attorney and TCIA board member. I started my law practice in 2009 when we did nonprofit mutual benefit corporations all day long. Obviously, my practice has grown and evolved quite a bit since then, now working on very similar matters as my colleague James over here, corporate and transactional issues, and of course, licensing and compliance work, which changes every single day. So thank you for coming to our panel.
Okay. So why don't we begin with an explanation for the group as to, well, I guess the first question is there any part of the cannabis industry now that doesn't require some vigilance with respect to compliance? Because I'm certainly not aware of any. Pardon me? The black market. Well, we'll get to that at some point. I mean, you know, actually, the black market is a pretty big issue because legalization hasn't produced a lot of the rewards for the state that it had anticipated. And when they say, "Gee, Henry, you know, we were supposed to make millions and millions of dollars in tax. Why aren't we making it?" I say, "'Cause you got too greedy." I mean, essentially, you don't want to tax people to come in out of the cold. You want to make it as easy as possible, because the more people that come in, the more you're actually going to get if you do it right and you don't try to exploit the situation that you're conceptualizing. I don't know. Let's see. I got a little thrown up there, but we're going to take questions at the end. But
Oh, I was just gonna say, what about the companies that take the cannabis waste? Where are their regulations or?
Well, I mean, I would say the companies that take waste, I mean, the one thing, I think that compliance is interesting right now because at this phase of evolution, I think compliance is such a general term, it's almost like saying math. And you're like, what do you mean? Do you mean trigonometry or algebra or what are you talking about? Because there's so many different aspects. And that's kind of where I think a lot of people run into trouble is there's the cannabis regulations and people read all the cannabis regulations and may check every box and be like, yes, I'm in accordance with the cannabis regulations. But when you get into things like waste disposal, then you have to look at your local code for what's your public resources code, what's your public waste code, what is your rules around composting in your locality, what are those record keeping requirements, and that every single point I did a version of the regulations where I just flagged every time they referenced another code. And it's like opening a wormhole where you're like, and they're like, la, 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 by the way, and you have to be in compliance with all of the labor code. Then you're like, okay. So it's difficult because on a cannabis, regulatory audit, it might be like a question where you're like, hey, are you in accordance with all of the labor code? And that person might say, yeah. And then maybe that doesn't get pursued. But I can guarantee you 99.9% of companies operating right now in the cannabis space are not completely in accordance with the labor code, Sorry.
Okay, so since no clapping, please. Okay, since you're on a roll, Julie,
Oh, dear.
why don't you tell us how companies should be viewing compliance issues?
You should be viewing it with the same red hot panic as climate change. I think, you should be viewing it as a comprehensive, foundational, and fundamental part of your business. One of the most horrifying things I hear when I talk to a company is when they go, "Oh yeah, we have a compliance person," singular, and they believe that that person is going to be responsible for all of the seemingly infinite amounts of compliance that has to be done. I also would like to remind people that compliancy is not a word. I hear that all the time. they're like the compliancy. It's not actually a word yet. But that everybody's job, just as you said, and it's been said that the cannabis industry is now the compliance industry, every single person who works at a company, their job is now compliance. Because it is one of the clearest things in the regulations is that the act, omission, or failure of any employee, anybody, whether you know about it or not, is considered the act, omission, or failure of the licensee themselves, which means the person who comes in and cleans on the weekend can make you lose your license if they are not following the proper protocols, doing the proper record keeping. And yes, there is record keeping required for cleaning your bathroom. So it just is it's an immense challenge, and it's something that right now, because there isn't very healthy enforcement, you see businesses standardly allocating the smallest smidgen of their budget to compliance because it's an afterthought, because they're like, it's not a big deal right now, but it is the number one thing. I mean, and the agencies have been clear on this, like for the CDPH, for manufacturing, record keeping, one of their number one enforcement priorities.
Okay, Kimberly, I think you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, well, I want to piggyback on Julie's comment about the regulation. It's BCC 5030 that basically says any act or omission of any person that's working in that facility is your act or omission as a licensee. And so what I see often is that my clients are writing written policies and procedures, and you have to submit your SOPs. And then that's sort of it, right? And so I think that what I've really been encouraging a lot of my clients to do is to really focus on their education and training of their employees. And that needs to be not just your typical training where you're going to come in and shadow someone, but also making sure that those employees, even the janitor on the weekend, is fully up to date on all of the regulations that could impact them. And I would even recommend that you need to test your employees before they're allowed to hit the floor. And if they don't pass that written test and show that they understand the policies and procedures that you've written and how to implement them, then they don't get to start work. And you can let them take it again, that's fine, but you need to really be putting checks and balances in place to make sure that your employees know the regulations as well as you do, and consistently refreshing those trainings as well. And anytime the regulations change, you need to stop and pause and make sure that they understand those as well. So
Well, they change like every week.
Then you need to stop. You need to stop and pause and make sure that they know those. So I really think testing them is important.
We heard earlier today when the representatives were there that, tell us if you think any changes are warranted, because we're happy to consider them. And I'm thinking, geez, every 2 weeks. I'd like to tell my clients when they come in all upset about something, look, don't worry about it. It'll change in a couple weeks. If it hasn't, then we'll talk about it and talk about what to do. But actually, this is a good segue into how would you advise somebody to set up a compliance program in their company? Let's start with you, Kimberly.
Sure. Well, so
Julie's ready to go.
Yeah.
No, I want to hear from that
So-
side of the room.
Yeah, I was going to say, and don't worry.
We can
we're gonna
punt.
go later, too.
I can
This is
punt that
John, this is
over.
the lawyers over here. Yeah, don't worry.
Well, so I'll just do a sort of quick bullet points. I think you've got to, of course, start with the written policies and procedures. You need to have a designated designated corporate compliance and regulatory compliance people, like Julie said. Then the training and education, I think, is also crucial. Then you need to make sure that there within your company culture is open lines of communication, so that if an error is observed, there's a way to report that. And then there's a plan in place to fix it. So that kind of goes hand in hand also with having frequent auditing and monitoring. And then again, as part of your policies and procedures, how do you address and fix those issues when they're either observed or reported? So corrective action plans need to also be written in place.
Okay. Brooke, I think that this fits into your area because Simplifya is supposed to help people do this.
Yeah. Well, I think, just to reiterate and not be too doom and gloom, what Julie and Kim said, your employees and who you hire is extremely important. And let's all be realistic. We are in an anti-authoritarian industry, by nature. And so, no, never, right? These guys love sticking to the rules. I bet they wake up every morning and get excited that they're going to have to do things a certain way, and they can't smoke on your premise anymore and, hang out and have fun like, in the good old days. And so hiring people, like they said, with the mentality that this is serious and that, every single thing that they do matters. And it only takes one mistake to have something shut down or fined. It's having every single one of your employees do the exact same thing, the exact right way that they're supposed to do it every day to be safe with compliance. And so I think that's a good place to start. And then, having a strong legal team behind you. Unfortunately, right now in California, you guys are the guinea pigs. This is still the Wild West. And as you guys know, there are a lot of gray areas left in these permanent regulations, and someone out there is going to be setting the precedent for that. And so I always tell people, if it was me, I would err on the side of caution right now and maybe not take too many risks. Let your crazy neighbor decide, if a certain shape of an edible is just, close enough to, appealing to children to make it count. But you need a legal team to really help mitigate your own risk and decide, how far you want to go with some of these gray areas and how to interpret the intent of the law. And I think that is really, really important, is knowing that sometimes these statutes say one thing, but the intent behind it means an entirely different thing. And if anybody wants to have nightmares tonight, you can Google Sweet Leaf Denver. That is the best example I have of the intent of the law versus statute. And then having really strong software systems in place. When you guys get into Metric, you're going to find out that it is just a wonderful joy to deal with. It is. It's very user friendly. Totally a joke. And you need to remember that piece of software is meant for the state. So you need to have a strong inventory management software that's going to back you up on that. And you need to have people that are taking that very seriously and monitoring that on a daily basis. If you get behind on your inventory, you do not even want to begin to understand what they are going to do to you. They will close you down and make you dig through every leaf and dust particle until all of that negative packaging is missing. And then, of course, there's other software systems out there like Simplifya, I'll toot my own horn, that is meant to kind of hold your hand and give you an easy way to guide all of your team members and keep those people accountable. Because again, this is not always the most fun thing. But as Henry said, we're not in the cannabis industry now, we're in the compliance industry. But the last thing I'll say is compliance is the sexiest word in cannabis because it keeps you out of an orange jumpsuit. And there's nothing sexier than that.
I think just one more thing, which is that one of the things I found in a lot of the legacy operators that I work with, where not that doom and gloom approach or the threat of enforcement isn't really the most effective way to get people to care, because these are people who have been very comfortable outside of the law for 20 years. So when you're like, you could get shut down, and they're like, whatever, it's fine. But the thing that's more compelling for them when they start seeing these processes implemented in SOPs and employees following directions and really good inventory systems is like, oh my God, I'm not losing product anymore. I don't have a theft problem. We're actually making more money. These systems are more efficient. So that's kind of the mind meld that's going to come together, I think, is that not only it's like compliance isn't only this horribly onerous set of ridiculous things put upon you that to make your life miserable. They actually come out of, legacy agencies like public health and things that are good for sanitation and processes that'll help your products not fail testing and things that'll not create a public health crisis and documentation procedures that'll actually help your company be more profitable in the long run. So it's not all terrible.
Well, actually, one thing that Brooke said that I'd like to comment on is the gray area. Because the gray area gives you a lot of opportunity to, as long as you make a good faith effort to comply with the law, if the law isn't clear, then it's not your fault. And we, for many years, have used gray in California as a way to get things done. Because as long as you try to do it your best and follow the law, you could argue what it really means as opposed to what they think it means as opposed to what they intended. But it's not your fault if they didn't spell it out with enough specificity to hold you accountable.
Maybe
Now-
to jump in here just
Sure.
very quickly. We're talking about regulatory compliance here, and I'm kind of the odd man out here on the financial compliance side. But this is, in my experience, has been kind of left by the wayside. It's probably one of the last things people think about is accounting and record keeping and when the IRS is going to come knocking at the
Not
door.
if they've
and-
been audited, it's
Yeah,
not the last thing.
No, to your point, Henry, I think the audit maybe just again something that's probably not top of mind. You kind of think it's not going to happen in
No,
May.
you hope it's not gonna happen, but go
Exactly.
ahead.
But yeah, it will happen. I think there's just a higher likelihood, obviously, of being audited in the industry. So making sure that your financial compliance program is also up to par is important. Hiring the right people, making sure they have the skill set to accurately record. Certainly, document retention is key as well. And then that two critical things in the financial process, which is a 4-eye review, right? Someone's doing the actual work, and then you have a reviewer that's looking at that work. And then the concept of trust but verify, right? You want to make sure that everything's getting accurately recorded, because it will come back.
So let me throw out a question that wasn't on the suggested list, and that is, do you think that a periodic, let's say quarterly or semi-annual audit by a law firm or somebody that specializes in this area provides you with a certain amount of cover if something goes wrong?
I'll jump in on this one just because, well, we're a auditing software.
No, but
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it's crucial, as we mentioned, with the regulations changing so much, you want a historical record of your company operating in good faith and compliance. And when you are finding things that are out of compliance in an audit, you want to be remediating those efforts within a 14-day period. The reality is, when you get audited, in the history of the Vicente Cederberg law firm, they've been doing audits since 2016 on thousands of businesses. They have never, ever once audited a 100% compliant business. It's impossible. And so you want to make sure that you're constantly doing this on a quarterly basis, on a semi-annual basis yourself, as well as having a third party come in and really analyze your business, because they're going to see things differently than maybe you do, especially when you're so close to your own operations, or maybe you even believe, man, I really want this to be the right way, even if it's not. And so things like that are critical. And again, having that historical record is going to be key when you try to sell your business, when you try to scale and get other locations. People want to be able to lift under the hood of your business, and having an audit trail is going to really, really prepare you and set you up to be in a better position than some of your competitors. And as you mentioned, there's consolidation definitely coming.
Yeah,
Well,
I'll
ahead.
comment on that too. So, as a testing lab and having ISO accreditation, we're subject to annual audits by the ISO organization. But on top of that, we regularly conduct internal audits by third-party people to come in and tell us what to expect when we get to the real thing. And I think, to Julie's point earlier, all it's done for us is just help us be better. I mean, really, like they're pointing out things that we might just have a blind spot that we just don't see. And we have corrective actions. We have all these things that now we document, and it's auditable and traceable. And so now we're defendable when the real thing happens, and if someone comes knocking on the door. And it's, I highly encourage third-party internal audits, like as twice a year at least.
Sure. Okay, it's a great idea, but all of this costs money. What if you're a small operator, you're just getting into the industry, you're on the smaller side, and you can't go out and afford to hire all these people? What can somebody in that situation do to protect themselves?
I mean, I think it's completely possible to build your own internal audits of your company. And if you have a department, even if you're just taking the regulations piece by piece and you're like, all right, let's do it. Let's go line by line through your manufacturer. Let's go through these packaging and labeling requirements. We're going to go down a line by line and do it. It's possible. But even in those processes, kind of what they're saying, and you know, there are softwares, there's things like Simplifya, there's all of these resources that are now available to the industry that are not you know, cost prohibitive. But still, I think one of the things is the documentation aspect of it that's so critical, of not just going through, and even when Kimberly before was talking about doing those trainings, like there are documentation requirements for those trainings where you have to fulfill to say, we trained on this day at this time, this is what we did, they signed their name. Those aspects of being able to provide a record for what you did, what the corrective action was, when it was seen, is an important kind of portfolio to build up. And I've seen it really benefit, especially during this past year, which we lovingly call the educational period of agencies coming, where it did mean something to the agencies to show up to a facility and see things that were wrong, and then have them pull out their audit report with their to-do list and go, oh yeah, we're working on this, and this. And so even making sure that the employees, and again, what Kimberly's saying about the employees knowing is critical, because they will come into the audit and grab the most random person trying to hide in the corner and ask them the questions sometimes to say, you tell me about your job and what you do, to make sure that everyone is kind of really functioning with this familiar knowledge of what the regulations are. Because I think that even if the company has not yet finished its full adaptation to the new regulations, the fact that you know when you're doing something not completely up to par is valuable to the agencies, to know where you are with your knowledge.
Henry, I just want to make a comment about your question about people that can't, like, it's expensive, right?
Yeah.
I think it is expensive, but I think it's a worthwhile budgetary item because it will save you money in the long run. Like, you know what I mean? It's so.
I've made that argument myself to clients. It sometimes falls on deaf ears. But realistically speaking, and no joking around, even if you can't afford to bring in outside people to do it, you keep a paper trail. Mm-hmm. I cannot stress to you how much the ability to verify that you made a good faith attempt makes if something goes south and you have to defend yourself. And it can save you lots of money. We recently saved one of our clients last year who kept records, who tried to comply with the law. It was a tax case. A $3 million penalty was dropped because the judge found that they tried to comply in good faith with a law that was not clear. So everybody is capable of doing that. And since we're now talking about legal issues, what do you think's on the legal horizon, Kimberly and James, in terms of what should businesses be thinking about from a legal perspective regarding compliance?
Well, I think, I guess the first thing I would say, and I think this is a sentiment that's been echoed many times today, is don't get too comfortable, because we are really only at the beginning of all of this. And I think we can look at Colorado to see how frequently their regulations change. I feel like every other week for a period of time I was getting emails about the pesticides list changing. So don't get too comfortable, and make sure that you you are documenting what you're doing. I think again that's absolutely critical. But last year we had over 40 bills pending in legislature, and I don't think there's going to be fewer this year. So I think it's also very important that you're staying up to date, because as soon as something passes, you need to begin setting the tracks or setting the wheels in motion to implement those changes. Obviously, I think one of the things that we're all really looking at is the expiration of the temporary licenses, and so keeping an eye on SB 67 is going to be critical for our industry, which will allow the agencies to extend temporaries if they haven't made a final action on your annual license. Gosh, there's so many different things we could talk about. Hemp, keep an eye obviously on hemp. I think that we're going to see a lot of good and exciting things happening with the hemp industry this year as well. A lot of progress being made. So those are just some general things. James, what do you think?
Ooh, temporary licenses. How many people in the room have a temporary license? Anybody a temporary license? Cultivation? Anybody cultivation temporary licenses? Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit, and then let's talk about the horizon, I think was Henry's question. So what do we know about temporary licenses? Oh, damn it, they're temporary. So I could ask, how many people have a temporary license that's going to expire? And you'd all put your hands up again, because that's what they do and that's what they're going to do. So yes, Senate Bill 67, I think, is going to come along, and it may be amended, and it will be passed. And I think the governor has taken an interest. I think we might hear more about that in the next day or so. And, it'll pass, hopefully, fingers crossed. Everybody make phone calls, send emails, and the governor will sign it, and it'll be too late. The math just doesn't work, right? We cannot make, even the legislature and the governor cannot make time run backwards. And so there is going to be this gap of compliance where you're going to be sitting on an expired license. And especially if you have a crop in the ground, it's not clear to me what you're going to do. So I think, though, yes, the sky is falling. And the sky, as you may have noticed over the last year, has fallen a couple of times. And what you do if you're a regulatory agency and you're implementing a new set of regulations, especially on an existing activity like, whatever, a couple billion dollars a year worth of above ground medical, is you set hard deadlines, and maybe they meet them, and then maybe they're all out of compliance, and maybe you find some little workaround. So I'm hopeful for some kind of stay of enforcement there. But what comes after temps, right? Temps were the good old days. Last year, especially if you were in Oakland, you could have come to town. I could have got you a temp. You want a temp? There's a couple of hoops to jump through. We'll get you local authorization. You'll get a state temp. Okay, that's over. So now in the real world of grown-up businesses, compliance, the first thing you need to start a business is you need a local entitlement, right? You need a conditional use permit, some kind of zoning compliance. And so I don't know about other places, but San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, you're lucky to pull that off in 12 to 18 months, right? And then after that, then you're going to do your state annual. So it's going to take a year or two to get a new annual license, which is all that's available, right, at this point. Because this thing about Senate Bill 67, where suddenly temps are going to be available again, or we're going to call them provisionals, but you can get new ones. I'm not holding my breath on that. I mean, if it works out, come to Oakland and we'll get you one. But, again, I'm not holding my breath. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not soliciting. If the ambulance goes by, that's somebody else can deal with that. You need local entitlement, and you need your state stuff. That means that you're in a world of jurisdiction shopping. So you want to go to local jurisdictions where regulatory compliance is relatively simple rather than relatively complicated, where the land use entitlement process is fairly swift, where maybe you can cut a deal with them that you can all live with by development agreement. And you also want to be looking at tax rates, because local tax rates are competitive, and we're trying to start a downward spiral so that we can move, especially non-retail, supply chain, wholesale businesses to local jurisdictions with the most favorable regulations and tax rates. Last but not least, if you've got lots and lots and lots and lots of money, you can buy an existing license. And that's tricky because, I don't know, isn't there some kind of regulatory compliance thing about that? But we'll figure something out.
No, but that actually, I had one other
Good.
thing to add. Well, two things actually. So, I know this was said on earlier panels, but if you have a temporary license and it's going to be expiring soon, you really have to contact your analyst and be responsive to what they're asking you for. If you need to get on a phone call with them, do that. I have a client who was just issued a provisional, and it was, I think, in large part because we were very responsive and it came at the 11th hour, but it did happen. So please do make sure that you are working towards getting them those supplemental responses. But that's actually not what I really was going to say. What I was going to say was, in terms of the horizon, is that this process has taken us so long that we're starting to see leases run out, and we're starting to see new investors coming in. And so it's important that you look at the regulations and understand what kind of notice and process is in place. If your lease is going to run out and you don't have the ability to extend it, or it just doesn't make sense for you anymore, that's a brand new application. Right? That's a brand new application. I have several clients that are coming up on that. And so what they're doing is they're looking to buying a license and seeing if there's a way to structure some sort of phase-in approach where they're becoming a new owner of an existing entity. But again, you have to really look at what that picture looks like, and are you going to be in business with someone else now, and what does that look like, and working out those details. So removing an owner from an application requires that person's signature, even if they're not an equity owner. If it's someone that just met the definition of owner because of that management or control, which could basically be anyone, right? So I think what's important is to really familiarize yourself with the processes that are required under the regulations when you're going to have some sort of change to your business, because you may need to tee that up a year in advance. You may need to find that new location with enough time to submit that application so that all of a sudden you're not out of your old location without approval for your new location. So that's something I think that's really important. It's starting to come up for some of my clients, and there's a lot of panic because of that.
So I think it's interesting that neither one of you mentioned what to do if you want to challenge a compliance regulation. Let's say they come in and they say to you,
Haven't gotten
you're,
there yet.
you're in yeah. They come in and they say to you, okay, you're not in compliance, and we're going to fine you, punish you, close you down would be the worst thing, and forfeiture type action. What do you think we're going to see much of that on the horizon, and how's it going to get resolved?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're about to see a ramp up, right? Like it was the educational component last year, and we may get a little bit more grace with that. But I do think the punitive enforcement is coming soon. And if you were to challenge it, I don't know, Henry, I'd probably call you and ask you to walk me through how we deal with that situation. It's great.
Thank you. That's
we
great
haven't.
advice.
Yeah, we haven't.
You can call me.
Yeah, or call you, James. I haven't had to deal with it yet, thankfully.
Well, nobody
but,
has, because
yeah.
they haven't really started, but I do think that it's going to come.
I
I
will
mean, the state thinks that they can, push us around, and at some point, people start to fight back.
Mm-hmm.
And if your license is at stake, you're going to fight back. You'd be foolish not to.
Yep.
I mean, it's better to go down fighting than to give in if you really believe that what you're doing is okay. Because if you just give up and walk away, you get nothing. And you might be the one that takes an important stand for the industry. But is this going to be civil litigation, or is it going to be administrative law?
How many lawyers in the audience? Any lawyers? Oh my God! Look at all the lawyers. We're among
administrative.
yeah.
Administrative,
Right,
I think.
I've got a really funny story about.
So wait a minute, let's get an answer here.
Oh, it's good.
This is what
It's gonna tie into
people
that.
want.
Okay, so here's a tip for all the lawyers in the room. You have to exhaust your administrative remedies, right? So when they send you the mean letter, they're going to fine you, penalties, suspension, revocation. all of that stuff. They're going to give you a right of appeal. There's probably going to be a 10-day, deadline. Don't blow the deadline. File the appeal. The problem is that in that appeal, well, I mean, you'll try to work it out informally first. What do they do with alcohol? You don't want to be suspended, you pay a fine, or if it's really bad, you transfer the license to your sister-in-law. I don't know if that's going to work with BCC. It works okay with ABC, but maybe we haven't captured the agency yet. But the main thing is you got to get all of your factual evidence into the record at the administrative hearing, which you're probably going to lose. Then you're going to go up to Superior Court on an appeal called mandamus, and you get no discovery, no jury. They're just going to review what the agency did below, and so you need your factual record all built there.
Yes, but you get to, you do get to argue, and, and that's an important right, and, Brooke, you wanted to
Yeah,
say something?
I was gonna first say something serious, and then I'll tell you the funny anecdote to follow this up. But
There's
I
nothing
think
funny about litigation.
Oh, nothing. No. But I think that when you think about enforcement and how this is happening, right? Your local and the state level are hiring brand new enforcement officers, right? They have never seen this stuff. And so you are responsible for making sure that you have a great relationship with the people in your local community that are going to be inspecting you. Ask them questions, reach out to them when you are confused and get clarity. But also be prepared, like Henry said, to fight back when they do not know what they are talking about. How many people in here are manufacturers? Anyone? All right. So I'm sure some of you are probably going to come up with some really creative products. Who in here is familiar with the Euphoria products? All right. For those of you that are not, they are THC-infused sexual lubricants. And in Colorado, when those products first got pushed out, our co-founder at the company got a call from a dispensary one day, that was his client, that said, the Denver City, enforcement officer came in and took all of the Euphoria lubricants off my shelf because he said they were edible products and were above the THC limits for an edible product. And not only did they take the products off the shelf, they shut them down and we're going to give them like a $10,000 a day fine. And so they called Jordan, which, as they said, make sure you have a strong legal team to call that know the rules. And Jordan called, at the time, the head of the MED, who was a 40-year plus narcotics detective. And when Jordan called him and said, hey, we have a problem, your enforcement officer came in and thought that this sexual lubricant was an edibles product, the guy did not want to talk about it. And he was just like, Jordan, what do you want to do? And he was like, well, I read an article that somebody tried to eat lubricant one time and it made him really sick. So clearly this isn't an edible product. And then put the product back on the shelf, opened them up, weren't fined. And so it's even those little things like that, know your enforcement officers, have a strong team to fight when it's necessary, and be prepared to have a good sense of humor because it's going to get weird.
Well, I think I think that's an issue that Tyler could help address, because as long as it's below the minimum adult dosage, you would be safe, right?
Yeah. I mean,
philosophical questions.
I mean, the changes recently in dosing requirements between topicals and edibles and concentrates and for medical use and not for medical use, and there's a lot of conditionals there that you're if it's this then it's that, and we obviously the testing lab should be flagging these things, right? So you and you have the information in front of you once it's tested, and I would recommend that if there's any confusion around that, reach out to the lab you're working with, and they should be able to clarify it, because I know me personally, I read that page about 1,400 times just making sure that I was clear on everything. So
Good faith attempt to comply.
yeah.
So,
That was not enough
so
time.
Jessica, we don't want you to feel left out because you do the accounting end of it. But what about compliance for all of the different taxes that the state is asking people to pay in the different areas of the industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely, I think the distributor here in California has a kind of the worst They're charged with administering and being withholders and remitters of all of these different types of taxes. Very different than in other type of experienced markets. You know, in Colorado, it's different. In Nevada, it's different. They remit directly to the state. The cultivator does, and the retailer, the retailer does, right? So very challenging from a distribution standpoint, but I think, again, important that you understand what your responsibilities are, how to collect the tax, when to report it, when to remit it. You know, specifically in Nevada, which is where I'm based out of, we did have a client that failed to remit excise tax. You know, the state is pretty much on top of that. There's a certain amount of licensees in Nevada. So to the extent that, you know, someone misses a monthly excise tax return, it's definitely flagged. They were issued a penalty of $50,000 plus, you know, going to get their license revoked unless it was paid immediately. So absolutely being compliant on taxes is important. And to the extent that you don't have the knowledge, whether it's internal or someone, again, on your team that understands it, it's important to reach out to an advisor that does. Really get you structured so that you can either in-house the knowledge or, you know, if you so choose to, just outsource it. But that will become very important. Again, we went adult use in Nevada in July of 17. Now Department of Taxation is in full force, going out and auditing. So it took them about 1.5 years. I suspect probably the same here in California. Once their enforcement unit gets, you know, built up with all of this tax revenue that they're collecting, you'll see definitely audits at the state level, and I would imagine at the city and county level as well.
Thank you. How do we all feel about the illicit market, and how's that affecting our ability to comply, or the fairness of compliance for people that are licensed and regulated? Boy, all the talkers stopped there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say right off the bat, I mean, it's tough. There is a cost with compliance. And when you're, I mean, I used to live in LA on Ventura Boulevard. And I think for every one licensed shop last year, there was probably 9 that were not licensed. And they even had giant signs outside of their stores that said, "No taxes here," you know, and I mean, it was wild. I mean, I had so much anxiety for them, but apparently they were just living on the edge. And it's rough. And again, you guys are the guinea pigs. You are forging your own way in this industry, and there is a cost to that. But I will say that I think, you know, those that start now and that are doing it right, you guys are going to be here in 10 years. And more importantly, once, hopefully very soon, cannabis is federally legal, it doesn't get easier. That means all the federal agencies get to come in, like the FDA. And so those of you that are used to complying with your state and local regulations are going to be in a much better position to be able to move ahead and thrive in a federally legal marketplace. That's my positive spin, I guess, or silver lining on that.
Well, I don't agree that federal legalization is.
I said I hope. I hope.
I don't think that's happening anytime soon. I think that the federal government is going to punt to the states. Eventually, it might happen, but I don't see it happening any time soon. And we better be careful about you know, the FDA, because that could just be a whole nother horror story. You don't want to trade the DEA for the FDA, because it just won't work. So that's why we always say when we talk about the CSA and scheduling, we don't want rescheduling, we want descheduling. Let's take it out. You know, actually, I was going to say this earlier about a comment that somebody had made, but you know, when you don't know what to do, look at how they handle things with the liquor industry, because that's the closest thing for us to try to pattern ourselves on. A lot of the regulators, both in Colorado, I know in Colorado because of the work I've done there, and in California, that they took the regulators from the liquor industry. And so those people are sort of used to dealing with these rules, and they can be very helpful to us in helping us navigate it and how to handle the unannounced audits and what to do if there's a problem and what to do if there's something in the gray area.
I just wanted to pick up on that. I think the relationship with the illicit market is an incredibly complicated one, because what we're facing now is, I think that Proposition 64, I believe, for California passed because a great number of people were motivated by the decriminalization of cannabis and the possibilities of social justice and repair that were embedded inside of the bill, and starting to kind of envision a pathway to right some of the wrongs and some of the damage of the war on drugs, which was never a war on drugs, which was a war on people. And what we have, because of where we're at with federal, state, local, all the legalization, moving at different paces, is a, by nature, incredibly cost prohibitive business opportunity that is only available to certain types of people who have access to enormous amounts of capital, who can sit on real estate, who can afford lawyers, who can afford the compliance, and that by its very nature whittles away this seemingly great opportunity for everybody to go get a license and get legal, where it's way easier said than done. So just the same thing. There's so many gradations where it's not just this binary, like legal, illegal, and you're one or the other. That one of the things that I think, communities like Oakland and Los Angeles, God bless its soul, trying, and Sacramento, who are trying to implement these social equity programs or some sort of pathway, some sort of technical assistance, some sort of funding, and some sort of commitment to attempting to allow for some diversity in the industry and some different scales of businesses to be included. Because, if it keeps going the way it's going right now, hey, we're all going to be Canadian in a hot second. It's going to be great. Because you have these other interests coming in that have seemingly unlimited capital that they're able to flood into this, while that fantasy of somebody with a darn good idea and a lot of heart who's just going to make it work is really becoming less and less viable every day.
And I think to piggyback on that as well, the the importance of getting involved in our local elections cannot be understated, because ultimately the way that we can begin to address the illicit market is to open up more opportunity, and by opportunity I mean, yes, licensing and real estate, but also social equity programs throughout our state. And so as a prime example, the city of San Diego has a new city council. We've got some younger and hipper people who have taken positions, and we're able to now restart, we're only at the very, very beginning, but restart conversations about consumption lounges, which I never thought we'd see the day in San Diego, where that's even a conversation that could begin, but also a social equity program. And so, again, getting involved at that local level, we're also this past year and this year too focused on state, and that's obviously important. But we need to return our attention to local politics as well and make sure that we're getting the right people in positions of influence and power. That's how I think ultimately over time we can really level the playing field a little bit more and make real change to undercutting or eliminating or reducing the illicit market.
I'd like to add something just super quick on that too. I think it's important that we still continue to vocalize, what we see are these really high taxes. Because again, that kind of deters what would be new customers and clients from coming to your establishments and going to the guy in the corner. Because again, they have a sign that says no taxes here. So while yes, it's important that there's regulatory structures that do collect tax revenue, it's just as important as new players or this industry, or as the state sort of goes and continues its licensing process throughout counties and localities, that we vocalize that to those local candidates, those local city governments, and make sure that they understand we can't overtax it, because again, you'll still have that illicit market out there.
I think that the best thing for compliance would be to focus on closing down the black market, lowering the entry level to the regulated market,
Yep.
level the playing field, make it so everybody wants to come in from out of the cold. And then we can start to focus on building from the ground up with a reasonable foundation on the compliance and the regulations. And that's the message to send to the local people and to the agencies. When they come to talk about compliance, say, hey, this is like when the IRS used to audit the dispensaries in California, and I would get into an argument with the IRS, because basically you're auditing the people that are trying to comply with the law. People that don't file taxes don't get audited. I mean, if you want everybody to be included, then, treat everybody fairly. Go after the people that aren't filing. Don't go after the people that are trying to follow a very difficult law. Okay, so what does the panel think is on the horizon for changes in packaging and labeling and product safety issues? Tyler, you can tell us about testing.
Yeah, sure. Well, everyone knows the changes that happened in January 1 with Phase 3, which was the introduction of heavy metals, mycotoxins, water activity. It's so hard to predict what changes could come from here. We felt like we were on our toes the whole year last year with, new regulations coming out every few weeks. And some of these changes, the regulators don't understand that, this a change in an action level or something it's seemingly harmless is like, oh, now I have to go buy another $250,000 machine. That's fantastic, So it's like, I would assume that California, from a testing perspective, I don't know if it's going to get any more tests, but they might reevaluate some of the analytes that, like, for example, the pesticide list might grow a little bit. But in terms of the heavy metals and the addition, our team is pretty involved politically in shaping and trying to shape these testing regulations. And the heavy metals piece, I think, was a controversial point for a while, but it's being introduced in the cosmetics industry and the pharmaceuticals industry. So I think the idea was that, if we're trying to be like other industries, let's be like other industries and not counteract the argument that we're trying to do. But yeah, it's impossible to know how the testing regulations specifically are going to change. Hopefully, we're sort of at a stable point for some time.
Anybody want to comment on packaging or labeling of products?
Well, I think we're creating a lot of waste right now. So I think that that's something the industry needs to look at and continue to work on. I have some just general environmental concerns for our future. So I think that's, a sort of a larger issue. I think we're all, what is it, 40403 CDPH regulations of the universal symbol need to be on the vape cartridge. I think, I must have read the regulations 10, 15 times at least, and I never had that interpretation. And so I think we need to continue to be on the lookout for other hidden issues that we didn't see, and continuing again to work with the regulators to try and come up with reasonable solutions, right? To simply say that, by July, all those cartridges have to, be sold through. Well, I hope for the industry that's true. That would be great. That means everyone's doing well. But I think that, again, we're going to have a lot of products that are going to have to be pulled off the shelves. So those are, to me, like, big picture, the environment. Short term is this universal symbol issue, and what else is hidden in there that we've missed. I'm a little nervous about that.
Well, did we miss it?
I'll say this.
Fair enough. Or
Change
could
their
there be like a
minds.
comma?
I mean, I'm just interested to know that for every manufacturer that was inspected by the CDPH from then till we started till now, and that absolutely no one ever received a citation for not having a universal symbol on their cartridge, makes me slightly suspicious that somebody may change their mind about it. But I do think I agree that the waste is a tremendous issue, and I believe that with the actual implementation, with the full-scale implementation of track and trace, I can only hope in my most childish and optimistic space inside that we can get to a level of kind of comfort and sanity when the state actually has eyes on the movement of product. It has always seemed insane to me that, you know, if I'm working at CVS in the pharmacy, pharmaceutical companies will send me bulk powder and pills for me to put in my pharmacy, and then when the patient shows up, I put the pills in the little jar, as many as they need, and I give it to them. And why that cannot be the same situation with flower products in our industry, rather than taking this, you know, godlike plant that is from nature and then putting it in tiny little 8s and gram jars and shipping them all over the place and destroying the world in the meantime, is beyond me in many ways. However, because they don't have eyes on it, because we're figuring this out, because there's all these packaging and labeling requirements, that'll come. And I think those packaging and labeling requirements will continue to change. You know, the most forward-looking manufacturers have just been looking at every other product. You could have known what was coming if you actually looked at the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act and weights and measures and all the things, and you would have known that it needs to be an SIN metric and that you need to put the weight in the lower 30% of your primary panel, and you'd know what a primary panel is because it was all already outlined for every consumer product that exists in weights and measures. So part of it is just us moving toward normal regulated products, and that's where we have to go. But it's not just the cannabis regulators that are going to impact us. As we know, they're having a call for data for new Prop 65 listing, where they might make THC a Prop 65 listing that has to be for reproductive harm, which means that, guess what, if that goes through next year, everybody's going to have to redo their Prop 65 warnings, not just on your smokable product, but on everything. Yeah. So, and those are all the things you have to have your eyes and ears on to show up at those hearings and bring your information and bring your data, so that those decisions aren't being made based on, fearful anecdotes.
Yeah, you actually raise a really
Ditto.
significant, you're not kidding, ditto. But you raise a really significant point. A red flag is that, Prop 65 is starting to be a threat to the industry. A couple years ago, we had some smoking cases. But now there's been, I think, 600 or 700 cases filed with respect to manufactured products. And Sweta and I are working with the Attorney General's office to try to come up with a plan that helps the industry and addresses the problem and doesn't allow the Prop 65 attorneys to see the cannabis industry as the next easiest target. So I have a question here that's actually for anybody on the panel or in the audience, if you know. Has anybody done any kind of studies or have any reliable data on what the cost of compliance is to the industry or to any entity? I'm not aware of any data like that, but maybe somebody else is.
Do an economic analysis with the law itself, which they said they did. But
Yeah, well, they say that a lot. Yeah.
Other heavily regulated industries do have about a 4 to 5% of annual revenue budget that you can expect for compliance. And cannabis being kind of
Heavily regulated? Go
yeah,
ahead.
compliance companies have been doing it for a long time. Ours is less than 1%, maybe 2% at most.
Well, so far, we've only been, yeah,
Affect the dollar,
that's,
probably what people estimate.
yeah, okay. Okay, so now that the panel is warmed up, this is a good time to start to take questions from the audience. So, here you go, you got 6 experts. Yes, sir.
In terms of illicit businesses, I've heard you, speak about taxes and wanting to bring folks out of the cold. But I didn't hear anyone this morning or even in this discussion mention local municipalities who are essentially adopting prohibition ordinances under the guise of legal cannabis. So, for example, I can't see you, James, but in Alameda County, especially in the unincorporated areas, you have small local groups who just don't want us or don't want the business in their communities, and there's several of them, and I'm trying to figure out, is this group really focused on trying to educate those municipalities, those council people, those boards of supervisors, et cetera?
Well, sure we are. And there's, there's a variety of different ways to do that. You do it by example. You try to win them over one by one. You point out the people that are their constituents who maybe had some kind of illness, such as cancer, and received treatment and used cannabis to ease their pain and suffering, to improve their appetite, and point out that these legislators, representatives, have a duty to those people, and that they're not honoring that duty by keeping cannabis out of that locality. It is a political issue, but it's one that we've slowly begun winning. We began with medical cannabis, and now we have adult use. And I wish there was some quick fix, but I don't have a magic bullet, a silver bullet.
I guess what I'm trying to, most of the folks in this room are already in the business.
Yes.
And as you saw from the last part of the discussions, new folks getting into the business, there was very few hands raised. Mine was one of them. And so if you're trying to get into the business where there are, just like ABC, like you mentioned, there are limited.
There were barriers. There were barriers.
This is just artificially capped. And so we have a lot of local ordinances that nobody's, providing any pushback on, where you see and you read through the ordinance, and I'm pretty sure James would know what I'm talking about, where essentially the ordinances are just sleeves out of the vest. You really got nothing. You only have the existing providers, and nobody else can get into the market.
James?
Yes, yes.
Oakland?
No, unincorporated Alameda County. So there's two ways of looking at this problem. One is from the ground up, from the local government level, and then the other is from the top down, from the state government level. So I don't know. There's 540 local governments in California. There's 472 incorporated cities. There's 58 counties. The deal that was made with the devil, both for MRSA in the legislature, after we lost the city of Riverside case, and then again by the author of Prop 64. It's funny. It used to be that anytime you were in a room full of lawyers, pot lawyers, they'd all be jumping up and down saying, "I wrote Prop 215. I wrote Prop 215." I never heard that about Prop 64. I'm just saying. So. But that deal was local ban, local opt-out, local option, right? That was the deal. We don't have that deal with alcohol in this state, right? The alcohol is in the state constitution. It hammers down. There is alcohol in every in every county and every city in this state. So we had that deal made at the state law level. We could make another state law. $25 million. Do we have another billionaire in the room? Because apparently the rule is that the craziest billionaire in the room wins. So there's that level. From the local government level up, all of the things that Henry said are true, and we fought that battle, and we continue to fight that battle, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, location by location. It is best fought by local people. And I am very hopeful that CCIA will do everything in our power to share the knowledge that has been developed in other jurisdictions where local consumers and patients have worked together to change the hearts and minds of local lawmakers. You'll notice that CCIA is not a consumer organization, right? This is a trade organization. Now, obviously, it's good for the trade if we can open the other, whatever, 2/3 of the state that is closed. But there needs to be a lot more organizing at the local level and the state level by consumers and by activists, and especially at the local level and by patients, right? Medical cannabis is not gone. And really the best way to provide medical cannabis in your local community is through regulated adult use, right? Is just the best thing for patients. It should be more convenient, better prices, better choice. Better quality than what's left of medical only, and almost as good as the underground market. I want to say that. I think we're getting close.
I mean, there are countless ones. A while ago, there was a CLE, a continuing education learning class for attorneys that was held that was on how to sue the cannabis industry. And there was a very long list of everything you could hit a person on, where the dram shop laws and the record keeping and the privacy and the product liability and stuff. So it's like there is and kind of back to the previous question too, like there is a weaponized anti-cannabis movement, and those people are incredibly organized, and you will see at these localities now, they are showing up with buses and with children with signs saying don't kill me. It's like they are not kidding around, and they just bring them in, and they show up at the city council meeting, and it's a kind of a new sea change. That's why I think organizations like CCIA are so important, and any of the organizations, is that we have to mobilize politically in short order with a force that has been unforeseen, because we're in 1930s prohibition land in the cannabis industry. The alcohol industry had from then to now to become the monolithic political force that it is. We have to really step up in our political capacity and our activist capacity, sane activist capacity, like not show up in a ganja G-string and be like, take all the regs away. Like you have, like, in a sane, systematic, organized way to fight for our ability to participate in this industry. Because believe me, all the other industries are just salivating, waiting on the sidelines for it to be safe enough for them to come and say, thanks for keeping my seat warm, we'll take it from here.
Okay, we've got a couple questions, so we can maybe
Juli,
try to.
yes.
I think there was a
Should we
lady
go?
in the back. Okay, well, it wasn't you, but it was your hands up, and you're in the back, so.
Resource for county by county, what's required to
Yeah.
conditional use?
Yeah.
Cannaregs.
Cannaregs.
Yeah.
You could talk, I know you don't want
You
to.
can demo it in the lobby
Wait,
downstairs.
For free.
It's for people in the industry. It's not cheap, but go down and talk to Amanda, and she'll tell you for okay. Oh well, she's got the best resource out there. Okay, you had a question?
Yeah, so I am trying to get clarification on what specific records regarding branding, packaging, and labeling the BCC requires. When I emailed them, they sent me back the regs. And then when I emailed the attorneys, they said any record relating to branding, packaging, and labeling is required to be maintained by the distributor pursuant to section 5310.
You don't understand that?
And I
circular.
said, could you specifically tell me which record? Are you looking for receipts? Are you looking for?
Well, that's the gray area.
Right.
That's the gray area. So you keep what you think is responsive to that, and if they tell you it's not, say, well, it doesn't say that here. It says I should keep records, and I kept them.
That's
yes, sir.
probably the best advice, keep everything.
Yeah, keep everything.
My question is, what qualifies as a compliance officer inside of
Someone crazy enough to do it.
No, right now, a compliance officer doesn't have a license, no license is required. There's no certification that's required.
Required technically OSHA training.
Yeah.
And you should have, it depends on your facility.
Yeah.
You would, if you're a food facility, you'd have food handler certification. kind of depends on what you're doing, but, you know, technically there's no certification required right now, but eventually there will definitely.
The reason why I ask is, do you really need one if you're a small business and just use the services, the compliance software services?
Well,
I think that's
I
a,
would
that's
say,
a good faith effort
yeah,
to
if
comply.
you have a business and you don't know who the compliance officer is, it's you. I mean, that's and you can take on that role. It's not a required role in your staffing plan right now. There's certain things in the regulation where, like she was saying, depending on the license type, you may require certain certifications. Depending on the license type, you may require, like, who's in charge of quality control, who's in charge of your recalls, you know, depending on those activities. But, you know, my rule of thumb is if anybody comes and tells you they're a compliance expert, not them, because generally anybody who's actually experienced in compliance is a humble and devastated person who is just like, I don't know anymore. It's too hard. And so, but that it really doesn't require, it's not a specialized thing. It doesn't have to be an attorney. It doesn't have to be, there's a lot of interesting people from other industries starting to come who come from, you know, medical compliance or pharmaceutical compliance or radiation compliance. It's like, generally, it's just the main thing that you're looking for, I believe, is, you know, somebody with that kind of rigorous and comprehensive willingness to move through those regulations. And usually it's a person who's going to tell you a lot of things that you don't want to hear, because you'll be like, I have this great marketing idea, and they'll go, no. You know, where I always say, as soon as you're, as a business owner, if you're feeling like your adrenals go off, like, I got the greatest idea, it's like, it's probably not okay. You know, so.
And I'll say one last thing on that, just to bring it back to Dr. Doom and Gloom. Every single one of your employees should be a compliance officer. Because again, it's all of your employees doing the right thing.
If you have to punt, say Juli and Brooke. Okay? And then we'll worry about it later. Sweta?
Yeah, so today, SB 34, which is a Senate bill sponsored by Scott Wiener, was passed. So this is the compassionate care bill that allows the elimination of excise tax on donated medical cannabis and allows free distribution at no cost to patients, which sounds great. Everyone was in support. It's actually a CCIA sponsored bill, which, you know, we're very proud of. But I'm trying to think, since the designation for medical cannabis is not made through the entire supply chain from the very end in retail, what kind of compliance issues is that going to create?
It's gray.
I was like, we can talk about that when the governor signs it. How about that? Because that's what happened last year. It passed. Everybody loved it. It was great. We all supported it, and it didn't get signed.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay. I always get nervous when I hear the word free in terms of cannabis. Okay. But I look at it from a tax issue.
And no taxes.
Because I represented a dispensary in San Francisco that was very famous for its compassionate care, and at their tax trial, the Martin Olive, the operator, it's called the Vapor Room, testified that he gave away 15% of his cannabis to people that couldn't afford to buy it, that were suffering from cancer. And at the end of the trial, the judge disallowed the cost of goods sold on the cannabis he gave away because he wasn't selling it, he was giving it away. So, if you find yourself in that situation, ask for a donation, tell them you'll take whatever they can give you, and if they can't give you anything, put in $1 of your own. They bought it. You already, okay,
sorry.
all right.
Are fines
Quick one.
Are fines being handed out now, and what are the top fines?
I haven't heard any
I
fines
mean, there
yet.
are.
There's the potential for fines, but I don't know anybody
I've
that's
heard
been
some
fined.
fines that have been done. I mean, the main one is if you don't let them into your facility, they will fine you. You know, other than that, I'm going to say everything else I've heard is urban myth that hasn't been verified.
Gentleman in the back, and then there's a woman behind you.
Just real quick, Henry, what do you think about if a license is required to sell cannabis in the first place? What are your thoughts on taking the cost of licensing and compliance to keep that licensing and cost of goods sold?
Under the latest federal tax court decision, that's not an allowable deductible expense under 280E. That's a much bigger conversation, but I can tell you that under the Harborside decision, it was one of our cases, came out in December, and they disallowed anything like that. Yes, ma'am?
Thank you all for all your presentation today. I appreciate it very much.
Lively group, huh?
I just wanted to raise a point about something that happened to one of my clients recently in terms of enforcement. This is a delivery company that has a licensed facility, but the building department ordered them to evacuate so that certain construction could be undertaken that was going to require some fire sprinkler installation. Bureau of Cannabis Control showed up at his temporary facility on Valentine's Day and ordered that they allow them in. Of course, it's not a licensed facility then because it's a different address. Bureau of Cannabis Control, after as much begging, pleading, and arguing as I could do, told him he was either going to surrender his entire inventory, worth wholesale $250,000, or they would make sure that he never got a license. So we talked about duress a little bit, and then the compliance officer called his legal department and changed his tune. But there is enforcement activity going on against licensees who are indeed trying. That's point number one. Point number two is what a tragic waste of the cannabis that could have been used for other purposes. And it's too early in the regulatory period to have a discussion about that. But it seems to me that if it's tested, sampled, passed, and otherwise compliant, material that is impounded just because of a technical violation should be donated for medical use.
Well, I think this is an example of the arrogance of law enforcement. I think that we have to assume that some of the people that work for the BCC are a little arrogant about their power and their ability, and maybe they've watched a little bit too much TV. In a situation like that, the best thing to do is to document it as much as you can and report it to the BCC and lobby for those people to be punished, and make sure that that's well known to everybody else in that department. You know, we are a growing force in the political scene in California, and we should never shirk from standing up for what's right. Some of us will suffer, but you know, everybody just pull out your cell phone and memorialize it. Yes.
We haven't had experience yet with fines from the BCC for compliance. We have a municipal penalties imposed for compliance on taxes in a funny way. So verification of age, having records of verification of age, which actually conflicts with HIPAA laws or did until
Yeah, that's
2018.
yeah.
We still got penalties for it anyway.
Boy, that was an issue during medical cannabis, and I've always used HIPAA, and they backed down right away when they heard that. I mean,
This year.
oh, this year?
San Diego, they're like,
Well, San Diego's got all sorts of.
It's how we roll.
We could put a panel on San Diego. Okay. Yes, sir.
On the webinar a couple weeks ago, Christina Dempsey was talking about operators not using GMP processes in their control systems, and that they should be watching out for a lot of issues, kind of hammer coming down. I hinted at that. You know, maybe highlights of some GMP issues that you guys have seen, or that would probably be the most important to adhere to. I mean, I know all of them obviously is the answer.
Yeah, I mean, one of them is there's a big documentation requirement in terms of batch production records, all these things, all the record keeping is important. But from their perspective, and I have a lot of empathy for the agency sometimes too, in terms of the sheer span of what they're seeing when they go out there. And same thing for me when I go out to inspect certain people. Or businesses where, you know, they're coming from the standards of food and public health and laboratories and facilities. And, you know, they're going into, there's businesses that, you know, got a manufacturing license because they could. So you know, I'm based out of LA. So in LA, you had the Prop Ds, and they suddenly had this opportunity to get other licenses, and they just got the other licenses. So they're like, all right, I'm going to get manufacturing. And the public health is coming into these facilities and seeing a piece of machinery, and they ask them, how do you use this? And they go, I don't know. And they're like, how do you clean it? And they're like, what? What do you mean? So just basic sanitation issues of understanding how to have a sanitary workplace, how to have sanitary workers. You know, I was auditing a facility the other day and just had a photo collage of all of the pieces of personal clothing that were laying on top of open jars of the top of the jar and the package and on the bar of the thing, where you're just kind of like, oh my God, like this is a big deal. And it's a very big cultural shift where in some of them it's going from, you know, like I said, people who were cooking edibles in their house to now being judged at the same level as a corporation making food. And it's not, I mean, that's the other thing to understand is just as we're defending, or we as the cannabis industry or licensees are defending our interests, our license and having to do these things, it's not like the Department of Public Health can be like, oh, you're learning, so you don't have to uphold sanitary guidelines. Like their hands are tied to a certain extent too by having to uphold the basic principles of good manufacturing process. So, I mean, that's why those resources that come, you know, if you really have no idea what they mean, I mean, the Department of Public Health recommends a certification course that you can take on their website to get GMP certified and understand those basics. There's the woman over here was talking about those food handling courses that will give you a basic idea of these are the things. And even, you know, like Simplifya or something where they generate template SOPs, it'll give you a general idea of, oh, this is the steps you should be taking. And it's hard. It's really hard. I'll just say this, that a lot of the people who have been doing this for a very long time, who are like, I've been making this for 20 years. Like, I know it. It's in my head. Like that process of trying to get that, you know, cultural tribal knowledge on paper in a checklist that can be followed by anybody. And that's another thing that the agencies have been very clear on. Is these cookie cutter SOP templates are not going to cut it. Like if your SOP says you spray on Wednesdays, they're going to come on a Wednesday and they're going to say, why aren't you spraying? So they really want to know step by step, what are you doing?
Yeah, in some of these inspections, actually, I have heard that is what they're starting to look at is what do your SOPs say and are you actually doing that? And I have had a lot of clients say like, well, can I just buy, I saw this, you know, I saw these SOPs. Like one client comes to mind, they submitted SOPs but Colorado for California business. And I'm like, did you at least go in and change, you know, change color, like replace fines?
Change the name of the state.
Yeah.
Okay.
And needless to say, I don't believe that person was awarded a license, but that is something that they're going to start looking at. And I think that businesses really, if you need to work on your SOPs and again to make sure that you are writing a plan that you will follow, writing a plan that you can train employees on, and that is something I think that they're going to start to look at because that's a real easy one to come in and stand with a clipboard.
Okay.
Yeah, those SOPs apply on the financial side too.
Mm-hmm. I think that we've run out of time. It's 5 o'clock and there's free drinks downstairs.
Free? Let's go.
You
said free, Henry.
Am I free? Oh, really? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Well, just go down and say I heard they were free and see what happens. I mean,
it's all those years of lobbying. Free alcohol.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Thank
working.
This is the best panel.
So much fun.
Let's go.